Welcome to episode 4 of The American Yeoman, where we bring 18th century opinion to bear on 21st century issues. I'm your host, Anthony, and with me is my co-host, Travis. This podcast, articles, and more can be found at theamericanyeoman.com. Well, Trav, another beautiful evening we have before us, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely, yeah. It's not, for once, it's not humid and starting to cool down a bit, so.
It's starting to feel like fall, isn't it?
A little bit.
Thank God. Better working weather for you, huh?
So, you want to talk a little bit more about education, which was the last episode. So, you want to expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, really, as it is my profession, at least for the time being, I do have a lot. I could talk about it for quite a long time. My whole experience with doing classical education. I want to reiterate that, and I don't even know if I quite got this across originally, but I mean, I wanted to teach. Being homeschooled, I essentially received a classical education by default. Mm-hmm. And, with this feeling, the desire to just instruct others in the ways of the Lord, bring up the next generation, all that. I mean, I've had that in me, that desire since really high school. It very much coalesced. So I've been eager to really dip my, get my talents going, working in the classical education arena for a while. So it's just interesting because the 1 year so far that I had teaching at a classical school really gave me the opportunity to see things about classical education that as an outsider, I never saw. And also as a homeschooler who'd I only ever went up to first grade in a private school.
You ever did a co-op or anything like that?
We did, but it was pretty informal.
Right.
So it was really a culture shock to even just teach in a school. So I suppose I almost had the same experience that a homeschool student would have had who turned around and went to a school after having been homeschooled.
Right. I hear a lot of parents will teach their kids to 10th grade or something they're comfortable with, because math at the very beginning is really easy, multiplication, adding, subtracting. So they'll teach them to a certain point and then they'll put them in public school for their high school or,
Right, anyway. Right. Although now it's even, I've heard, you hear things about even private schools these days. And I don't know. Maybe there was maybe your children would be exposed to a lot of crap in private schools in the past. I don't know. You hear about, I've heard stories about kids getting molested in English boarding schools. You know what I mean? A long time ago, that was a thing. But anyway, in particular these days, it seems like you're best off. If you're being led by the Holy Spirit, you're trying to honestly live. You're trying to live a life in line with Jesus is your leader. Right. You're better off teaching your own damn kids. Mm-hmm. So I really came away with that strongly with that impression. Now, one thing that we're trying to keep this to an hour, so we really cut off early last time. One thing that kind of bugged me slightly was that I didn't quite fully articulate my thought that I was developing at the very end, which was, I said, ultimately, what are these kids to me? And by that, I'm expressing my frustration that, you can't pick the time you're born in, and maybe that's probably a good thing, really, because God deems us to be in whatever time we're best suited for. To do what He has for us to do.
Work, yeah.
Precisely. So I can't sit there and whine, that I wasn't born in the Middle Ages. I honestly probably wouldn't. Probably
would hate it.
Probably wouldn't like it very much. Yeah. I'm a modern man for all that is. I feel like a medieval man in a modern world. That's our calling. But anyway, so I said that about my frustration, voicing my frustration.
Yeah.
And what I was frustrated about is just thinking about how in the past, a teacher would have existed in organic community with the students. So, I would know their parent. I would know their parents.
Yeah, you're missing that connection. Yeah.
So, and I'm teaching them, and I'm kind of like teaching the future members of my community. So it just makes it all the more, the stakes are higher.
More meaningful, I guess.
And I think there's more, and I think there's more reinforcement at home. Because as I said, even at this classical Christian school, you get a lot, classical education has an ideal. It has a very high ideal. This is the historic way that Western civilization has educated people. They're trying to bring that back. But, really to get to fully realize the ideal, you have to have the parents fully on board. And the school I was at acknowledged this. This was something that the staff themselves was like, yeah, we're really trying to get the parents to be more on board with the vision. But you get those kids who come in and they're like, they're in sixth grade and these girls are expressing feminist,
tendencies,
opinions. Yeah. And it's just like, what can I do? Our little friend Romeo the orange cat decided to join us. But anyway, it's just like there's so many messages that these kids are getting these days,
right?
And
they're all on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. That's another one. And so, oh gosh, that's another thing.
They don't have the reasoning and the logic to sit through all that, especially so they're already ingesting all of this propaganda.
Right. Before they get to me.
Right.
Before they get to me. And that's another thing, the way classical education works best is if you start in it when you're in kindergarten. Like you go all the way through and it builds. Like that's the best, most opportune, best way to go about it, according to classical educators. But that's obvious. You can tell the difference between kids who come into the school from, like, say, public schools versus kids who've been there forever.
Right.
But, you got a lot of parents now who are just looking for a school that's not crazy.
Right.
And it's not going to, like, teach their kids satanic shit. So I get it. I get that. It just, I'm wondering I feel like my impact is less. I know my impact is not quite what I'd like to be if the circumstances were different. And I should also add, I was not anywhere near the school. We tried to relocate to be nearer to DC. And I forgot that I wasn't in Amish country anymore, and things went south. There's people who are down south of Mason-Dixon who aren't in Amish country, and they're not necessarily as friendly or respectful of property rights. So anyway, it ended up, I finished out the school year being quite a distance away. So don't recommend that. But I also didn't want to bail on these guys because, I don't want to screw them over. Or I don't want to hurt the kids by,
disappearing on them.
Yeah, I felt like it. It was tough. It was tough to stick it out, honestly. Mm-hmm. So the other thing that I would add kind of on top of this, if you're okay with me keep blabbing along.
Go ahead and keep blabbing.
So the ecumenical problem. I was excited about the fact that, I thought it was kind of neat, I guess. Yeah, I thought it was neat that it was a ecumenical minded school, which means...
What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, ecumenism is a current in Christianity which seeks to unify different denominations. So we can unify around... As C.S. Lewis termed it, mere Christianity, throw out the the non-essentials. We're not going to let that get in the way.
Right.
So the school would allow.
I mean, Maryland is kind of known for that.
Really? Yeah. Good point. But
allowing Catholics and Protestants pretty much live pretty peaceably in Maryland for the most part.
Yeah. Beautiful thing. I get irritated I get very irritated now. And I used to be a Christian who was very strongly of a particular camp. But I get very irritated now by Christians who, and I think, as we mentioned before, we're now coming to the point where it's like, okay, the churches the institutional churches are
bad.
really hopelessly corrupt at this point. So we just need all good men on deck. You can prove to me that you love the Lord Jesus Christ. I don't really care too much how you think you should be baptized. You can go do that. Whatever. We can work that out. Anyway, so it's cool that it's ecumenical. All right. But then to try to teach history to kids where it's just, from all different backgrounds, especially when history curriculums are usually written from a particular perspective. Like a particular denominational perspective, if it's a Christian history program, it is genuinely frustrating. And this is another thing where it's just circumstance. I'm talking, these kids are real people, you know what I mean, in the world who need, they need to grow into their full potential. God's calling them. He wants them to be his sons and daughters, etc. So I'm complaining not about the kids. I'm complaining about the circumstances, how these conditions our country's in, our world is in. It makes it kind of crappy because just instead of being able to talk to these kids and they're all kind of on the same page, I had some kids who, kind of didn't,
weren't paying attention, weren't engaging.
There's that, but there's like some kids who are just really, they're in a Christian school, they're technically Christians, but they're really ignorant of Christianity.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to help that. I really want to help that kid. But just a weird mix. It just ends up being a weird mix. That, and honestly, it's looking like I'm going to teach this year. My God, I can't believe I agreed to do that. I really do have fun. It really gives me joy. I'm thinking it was the circumstances that really kind of, in particular, bummed me out, and the disillusionment. So this school I'm going to teach at, though, is not classical. So it'll be interesting to see.
The other part was you're telling me you didn't have like the freedom of of kind of doing your own thing, teaching wise, like.
Right. The administration became very. They behaved in a rather in a very womanly fashion. They're women, of course, and in the sense that it's there was a lack of directness. If they were displeased about something, and the lack of directness ended up translating when they were particularly displeased about something into just heavy-handed authoritarianism, where they treated me like I didn't have, like I was a peon. You know what I mean? Right, like you said, I wasn't lit.
I get you.
It degenerated into that. So I've really enjoyed working with some women. Generally, it's funny. Generally, the women I enjoy working with are like men, and I don't mean that in that they're butch. I just mean that in that they're very relaxed. They're very relaxed and happy-go-lucky people. You know the type. Like, for instance, Travis and I go way back. We were in 4-H together. We did horticulture. I'm not going to name names, but there's people in there who were our coaches or something who just were like, as I said, they're not dykes, but they're just laid back women. I just have noticed a trend. It seems like women have a tendency toward neuroticism as a class. I hear that a lot of them are on an anxiety medication. That's a meme. True, yeah. That's a meme. So I think it's just a way in which I would suggest that's a way in which modernity is impacting women. Is making them more.
I have a grandmother that couldn't. Well, not a grandmother, but I had a relative that couldn't drive because she was so afraid of like hitting someone or going off the road or going too fast. Like she was literally too afraid to drive, so she never got a driver's license. But yeah, and also my personal grandmother, she couldn't really drive either. She didn't like staying in the middle lane, like on the highway. She didn't like staying in the middle lane. She always has to be on the far left or the far right. There's no in between. But as you were saying,
yeah, that's the thing. Women can't drive. I think it's funny because I know this is getting a little off topic, but I mean, if you're being completely honest, and if you add up all these things about that we say about women or what have you, it just paints an interesting picture that I think that in some ways that you could say women are a little bit out of their depth in dealing with things that they have to deal with now that are like, okay, you're handling this. You know what I mean? You don't have you don't have a partner. You don't have a male partner who's handling this for you. That they seem like they're a little out of their depth. But getting back to just the ecumenical thing that I mentioned, so I'm going to be teaching at a school that's not a classical school. It's actually a Catholic school that's not classical. But I'm kind of excited about that just because it's one faith, so I can teach from that one perspective. Albeit, I have an interesting one. You know, I'm not just.
You also know the people there too. That's a big difference between the other school you were teaching at.
It is. It's a relief. I'm looking. So that's a good point because I'm actually a member of the parish. Technically, haven't been over there in a bit because we moved around and everything, but we're back here, so that's really cool. I'm excited about that. So just a couple other thoughts I have, Trav, just about classical education more generally. I think I mentioned this last time, but it's worth saying again. Grades, classical education, they really want to get rid of grades, but until they do get rid of grades, it's to have grades in classical education. It's a square peg in a round hole. Grades as a means of assessment, simply because, like I said, you have the students who are not intellectually curious; they're just really good at playing the game, and the grades that enables them to play the game. Whereas if you had another means of assessment that was not so mathematical plug and play, this letter spits out, if you do X, Y, and Z, then suddenly I think, you would see those
more
students who are not really scholars, they're just good at playing the freaking game. They would be seen for what they are, you know what I mean? Not really scholarly material. And the students who are truly creative in their thinking would shine more. I would suggest. It's a good vision, but it's frustrating. It's frustrating. I'll tell you. Teaching with the students who are just after the grades. Another thing I find interesting. This is a bit more obscure, but we like that.
All right. Yeah.
So, classical education really was originally an aristocratic an education for aristocratic. I suppose men and women, young women, would have been educated.
Oh yeah. They had their own schools.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So that's the original purpose. The recovery of classical education, as the modern classical education movement is called, seeks to democratize education. Well, just like education has been democratized. Well, it doesn't challenge that. I mentioned compulsory education is crap. Not everyone should receive the same liberal arts education because. Liberal, after all, means free, or libertas libertatis in the Latin, and it was the education of a free man. Now, we don't have, you could say we don't have slaves, but we effectively have the equivalent. We have wage slaves.
They can barely get by, yeah.
Right. And you have people who even their mentality toward education is still a servile one. I mean, the people who are playing the game should not receive that education. It's a disgrace. As a scholar, and I mentioned this last time, and as a scholar, it offends me. It honestly offends me that, my educational experience in this current year, when I go to school or what have you, is made shittier by the fact that there's all these posers. Because our society has made it, has done this to education. It really pisses me off.
I mean, bring up a point here. So to tell you a little story, that has to do with. So one of my friends, he had a collapsed lung on the job. That's randomly collapsed. Apparently, it's pretty rare, very rare. So anyway, he had a collapsed lung, And so he drove into a medical center. They said they couldn't do anything, so he had to go to the ER. But they called an ambulance to come like a mile away to pick him up and drive him to the ER. And if anyone knows, an ambulance picking you up is like thousands of dollars, even if it's like 1 mile away. But anyway, so yeah, he gets to the hospital, and there's this Indian doctor. So if anyone knows about, a collapsed lung, you need to puncture it with it's like a big needle basically, and you got to reinflate the lung. Mm-hmm. So anyway, without any painkillers, this Indian doctor, he's trying to go in between his lung and stab him into the lung, right? So he's stabbing him, and he's hitting his rib cage. He did it multiple times, and then finally he gets it, into the lung. And he did that without giving him any painkillers. And then, the nurses and stuff like that were kind of pissed off with the doctor. He's like a newbie. And the nurses there, they've been nurses for like 20 years, 25 years plus, whatever. But anyway, they got they finally got the needle in or reinflated his lung, and so now he's just laying in the hospital, right? And so a few days went by, and the doctor came in and started talking to him, and he didn't really talk to him back. He pretty much asked him, "Oh, so how much does it hurt?" Whatever, little questions, mm-hmm. And he just leaves. But then the next day he comes in, he just comes up to him, pulls the spike out of his side, and then just puts the spike right where his platter would be if he had if he was eating. So he just pulls out the spike, there's blood everywhere, just slaps it down onto the nightstand, and the nurse comes in and blew up on him and just started and just got him out of there. And I think the nurse was actually a dude. He was a medic in the military, and he after he got out of the military, he took a job at the local hospital. And so he freaked out on this dude, kicked him out, and I think he wrote a report on this on this doctor. But anyway, the whole point of this story is that doctors and nurses nowadays, they're finally changing it, where they're going back to the old ways where they actually have hand-on experience. But a decade ago, they were just going through material, and sure, you gotta have a few hours, but it wasn't really hands-on like it was back in the day. Right. Back when my mom was a nurse.
It wasn't a practical, it's become more of an academic.
Right.
Their training's more academic than practical.
So basically, this Indian dude, he just did all the testing, he got all his A's, and just became a doctor. And he never really did any,
And that real concrete field work,
right,
if you will. It's funny because, surgeons in the Middle Ages used to be barbers. It was the function of a barber. I guess he was the guy who had the scissors. So it was his, a part of his job was, he doesn't just cut your hair, he'll cut you open if you need something done. So it's interesting because it's you might think, oh my God, that's, how horrible. Your barber is going to cut you open. But it's kind of interesting because that's an instance of a super practical. That dude is probably doesn't have much university experience, but just a super practical thing. So you're trusting the skill of his hands, and hopefully he knows something about what is inside your body. But anyway, it's interesting because now we're going to the far opposite side, which you'd think, a little bit of Galen, a little bit of anatomy lessons might help him out.
Right.
But now it's you've got, again, what you said, these people who are just good at taking tests, and that's one thing that's really gotten me red-pilled on the medical establishment. One thing that's gotten me red-pilled on the medical establishment in general is just thinking that as a philosophy student, I really think I'm smarter than a lot of these people in the medical profession, because my education taught me to think outside the box. Their education taught them to think very much inside the box.
Yeah, they're robots. And so what happened was, it wasn't just doctors, it's nurses too. And so one of my cousins, she worked in the ER, and she's been a nurse for 20 years. And what happened to her was she found out she's doing multiple jobs at once, because now she has to teach these young nurses that came out, how to actually, do things like, they've seen it on paper and stuff like that. They've done maybe, given shots, but they haven't worked in the ER where people are like, flailing around like half burnt or got a gunshot wound and they need to be patched up. So they never had to deal with that before. And so they're like freaking out. And so she had to pretty much teach them right there, like re-educate them. And so she found like it got so stressful for her, she quit because, like I said, she had to help teach these nurses as well as doing her job. And so it's not like, oh, that's all she was doing is teaching these new nurses, like, and watching some other nurse do it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But no, she was doing it while she was trying. It was a bad mix. Yeah. And finally, they're starting to go, like I said, back to the old ways where they actually have nurses on the sites and, participating. But not too, like, crazy, like, out of their depths.
Right. So. Within their skills, within their arena. Mm-hmm. The other thing that really kind of scares me about what you just said is that my experience with Indians, like one of my experiences, is that they are social climbers. I mean, they're aggressive social climbers.
Asians are like that too, but they're not as aggressive. But
Asians are known for being Asians are known for their intelligence. Yeah. Like you can at least trust that they're not. Indians are not known for their as a group of people. Like those Indians in general are very bright. No one would be like, you say that about like Chinese. You're like, the Chinese are very bright. Indians. No, they're known for being, in my experience, they're known for getting into management positions and just climbing the corporate ladder as quickly as they can without really learning anything underneath. So people who work under Indians find it very frustrating because their Indian managers don't really get what's going on. Yeah. Managers in general have that problem, but Indians in particular don't really learn the ropes, from what I've heard. So anyway, it's creepy to hear you say that because I am noticing there's a lot of Indian doctors popping up, and that is a concern. Honestly, it's a concern of mine. I mean, there's a lot of things that concern me about doctors these days, but that is a concern of mine for sure.
What was I was going to say? Man, I just blanked out there.
It's all right. It happens to the best of us. If you remember it, I was gonna just finish one thought that I had was that it's funny. Well, it's not funny. It's just peculiar, I guess, that in the recovery of classical education, I mean. My question would be, what's it for? Why are you wanting to recover classical education? Because you're not wanting to go all the way. You're not wanting to go back to like this is the training for aristocrats because we don't have the we technically you could quibble, but like we're all supposed to be citizens now. You know what I mean? So apparently, we're all supposed to be free. So liberal education is for all of us. Right. But clearly, not all of us make the best use of it anyway. So I would suggest, maybe only some, maybe not all should have it. Why invest all? Why invest the best? Let's say you were investing the best. I mean, most education people gets not the best, but why? If you could invest the best, which some people would say, yes, everyone needs the best in education. Why invest the best? Given that how it's people. A lot of people just aren't gifted, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way it is.
They're forcing a lot of kids to. They're not even interested in being a teacher or whatever, or a lawyer, and they just want to work on cars or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is that they have to go through all this schooling, which they don't really need. I mean, they could be like the Amish, where they go to like 8th grade. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can just like do 8th grade,
right?
And then, go to a trade school instead of just going, instead of wasting more time.
Right.
And then just go straight to the, plus, you don't even really need to go to a trade school anyway. You can just go, straight to the job. And most of those places will teach you right on the job because they need people so badly. A lot of those places will you be an intern or you'll work for free for a little bit as you gain experience, and then you just you'll make crazy amount of money.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you that cry of many a student that how is this going to benefit me in the real? How will this help me find a job? How will this benefit me in real life? They're asking that because if you're saying that, you're basically admitting to be one of the people who liberal education, which by the way, if I didn't make it clear, liberal or classical education is the same thing. We technically have liberal arts, but it's been perverted from its original. The name still exists, but it's not quite to the depth, the degree of like studying the great books, that sort of thing. Right. Classical education seeks to like make it hardcore again, but still, classical education is still building itself as an educational solution for everybody,
which doesn't work.
And
to me,
I hear way too many people saying, how is this going to help me find a job? And that's not.
Well, they don't teach like practical things like how, like, people always mention how to do your taxes, how to write a check, but not only that, they the main thing is just teaching reading, writing, and math. As long as you get those three things down, the rest of the teaching should be, building character, like teaching, as long as a person has good character, honesty, and the desire to learn more. They will naturally have that if you just give them the tools. So as long as you teach them reading, writing, and math, they can learn as they grow. You're always learning new things anyways. It doesn't end when you finish high school, what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So and that's the problem with like history books nowadays, is that the person that makes those curriculums, they're just going off another curriculum. They're not even going back to original sources. They're just taking a piece here, a piece there, and just make their own curriculum for
exactly.
That year.
And the bad history, the bad knowledge just gets perpetuated to the masses.
And it gets worse.
Yes.
It goes farther away from the truth each and every year. And now we have a bunch of nutcases.
Yeah, exactly.
And so when they're finished high school, they go, the establishment, people encourage everyone has to go to college. And then they go into college and they take major into something that they like, but usually it's like history or English, something that's not going to help them out really, because everybody's being a journalist, or it's hard to get jobs in those type of fields and stuff. And so a lot of these people are just collecting debt, and then they're like, well, what do I do now? And you're just working minimum wage jobs, really, and so they have all this debt and they're working minimum wage, and it sucks.
Yeah.
Well, not me personally. I'm debt free, but I'm talking about my fellow millennials. I guess, are we millennials?
We're technically on the border, but
yeah. Anyone in their 20s or 30s, whatever, they know.
For sure, and a lot of them are in that situation but truly by the grace of God, we're not.
We did online, which is like way cheaper because you're not on campus. On campus, you're paying for the room, the food, whatever, and it's not worth it.
So anyway, just to put as I heard an old-time Baptist revival preacher once say, he's got to put the mule in the barn. To put the mule in the barn on this particular thought, when I was teaching, I'm thinking, this used to be the education of aristocrats, of the best and brightest leaders in the community. Of
this was Princeton.
This is a prince's education, and you made it. It's owing to the modern conditions. It's democratized, and so you're teaching shopkeeper sons, and you're teaching ditch diggers, and you're teaching bureaucrats, and you're teaching everybody is getting the same thing. And many of these kids, because of their backgrounds, are going, how will this how will this help me later in life? How will this help me find a job? How will this help me get ahead?
I mean,
blah, blah, blah. And real quick, it's just like, I'm thinking, man, it seems like we're in a terrible situation with the way our country, the way our civilization is in such terrible straits. And you're taking, something that used to be the education of our leaders for great purpose. And instead it's just kind of like, I know you say it's like, it's training in virtue. It teaches you to be like the best person you can be. And that's great. But that wasn't really what it used to be about. That wasn't really what the point was. The point was to command, to have the knowledge to run, to rule your society. And so I guess I wish that the people who are trying to recover classical education would just be a little bit more honest with the fact that they're not really, they're to me, they're kind of like the conservatives who want to go back to the Constitution, but they don't want to redo the Civil War. Like they don't want to take back those amendments,
right?
Which, if you're being completely honest,
and they don't want to get rid of a few, you know what I mean?
Right?
Because if you're taking back some of the amendments, you're throwing away quite a few.
Yeah, if you want to go back to the Constitution, my friends, as we do here at the American Yeoman, we want to get rid of all the amendments except for the Bill of Rights, and we're going back to the 18th century, baby. You know what I mean? That's a whole nother ball game. And so conservatives are mostly they are adopting the aesthetic.
They just want to go halfway.
They adopt the aesthetic of the past, but they're very much modernists at heart. And I guess that's my concern with classical education as well. And it was not helped by the fact that I went to a conference, which I will name that, the Society of Classical Learning, I think is the name of it. I went to their conference, and in the aftermath of the summer of George Floyd riots, as I mentioned before, they were, totally down with trying to integrate the black tradition with classical education. And not that there's not black scholars or that there's not something of it, that there's not something of interest, but it was just very on the freaking nose after that. And to me, that is a giving up of ground. And that is taking a stand precisely in, on the wrong side.
I mean, the Republican Party has been doing that for a long time, and then finally, Trump came along, and then finally we're kind of taking a stand, kind of. But before,
I just always looked at classical education as the savior in a way. Personally, you know what I mean? I found it wasn't.
Well, I mean, when Obama, I think when it really first started, when Obama got elected, it's like, oh, you're a racist if you don't vote for Obama, and it was like, oh, and then they allowed gay marriage. It's like, okay, we'll allow them to have gay marriage as long as they, don't indoctrinate our kids, which they are doing now. Mm-hmm. Remember that? And it just kept on going, and then we just give up, this and that and the other, and then finally we're like, okay, we're finally kicking all that crap out of the schools. Hopefully keep it up, but you never know. It's so either we keep on fighting like we should do, but you never. Sometimes these things just fizzle out, right? And then and then it just goes back.
People just go back to grilling.
Right. It's like, but since things are so bad now, I don't think that's gonna happen. There's no way turning back at this point.
Right.
But anyway, you have anything else you're gonna say about education?
Yeah. The other thing that kind of makes me just go, huh? It just is the fact that the pay, and again, this is a circumstance. It's not the fault of anyone. We could probably make some sort of a convoluted blame game here. But anyway,
there's a lot of reasons.
Sure, which we've even alluded to in episode 1. Pay, the lack of pay, the poor pay, makes it difficult for men to participate in this restoration of classical education. It's largely going to be led by women, just because they don't have the pockets aren't deep in many of these schools.
And you were telling me the problems of boys and girls being in the same classroom is not the greatest idea.
Yeah.
Mostly because,
They learn differently, and also they have different roles in society.
That, and the boys are more mischievous and stuff like that, so they're not really paying attention, probably throwing stuff at the girls or something.
And the girls, and the dynamic between the boys and the girls. Like, these are young people who are just kind of hitting puberty, and shortly they're going to be kind of like into each other. You know what I mean? Interested in each other in a romantic way, and so you see that with boys and girls. They're awkward around each other, or they interact differently. And they behave differently in an environment where they're boys in particular. I mean, I know they both do, but I notice it particularly with boys. I know that I much prefer boys interacting with boys when there are no girls present, to when there are girls present.
You think it'd be easier to teach?
I do. I think it'd be better. I think it'd be better to teach, for sure.
So is there anything else, or you?
You know what? I think for tonight, and I'll tell you in a second here when we're off line, but I think that covers everything I wanted to talk about with our education conversation. So we're going to call this part 2, I think, to...
Education-wise, yeah.
Yep, to part 1. We're clocking in about 40 minutes, a little over 40 minutes, so we're cutting it a little short this evening, but thank you for joining us on The American Yeoman, and we'll see you next time.